Hey YouTube, it's Derek Andre. I'm back with day 2 of my cut series. So today's a pull day. So that means I'm starting with rows. Uh, Working weight's going to be 195, and again, it's the same concept. If you watched the last video of Dappery, so it's 2 warm-up sets into 2 working sets, and the main goal here is going to be able to just like move the weight, keep it, and try and have some control at the top of the rep. The perfect rep for me is going to be like completely controlled to the point where I can hold it all the way in. That's easier said than done, especially when I'm like at the top of my, especially when I'm at the top of my, what's the word I'm looking for here? When I'm near my limit to the weight that I can handle, right? So ideally, I'll just be able to get clean, like 7 clean movements, and so I already got a nice warm up in, and at this point, it's just going to be setting up for Dappery. I've got 95 pounds on the bar, and like I said, the first work set of Dappery for me is just about getting familiarized with the weight, so it should move pretty easy. Um, and yeah, I'm just going to get right into it. All right, 95 for 10. So that first set, I'm always just hyper focused on the form, trying to make sure that it's like as clean as possible and carrying that into the work sets, right? And if you notice, I got a nice hold there at the top. It's going to be a little harder to replicate that in the working sets, but that is ideally what I'm looking for here. Like with everything in my program, it's about full range of motion and full control, right? So just being able to like emphasize that it's it's fully contracted to the point where I can hold it is going to be like an ideal rep. Like I said, easier said than done. But like head down and fully contracted, that's going to be like an ideal rep for me. Second set is always going to be 75% of the working weight. And again, it's just a warm up. So the weight should still move pretty easily, but this one's definitely going to feel more like closer to a working set. But it still shouldn't feel heavy. The concept is it's like the sweet spot middle in between. It's not going to move like super easy form focus like the first set, but it's not going to be quite as effortful as my work sets, right? If I miscount, I'll always just do one more. I'd rather go over than go under. If I'm not particularly acquainted with the weight, I think the best thing for me is I like to use belt and straps for rows particularly. But like the belt is for me always a way to kind of like cheat within 10 pounds of your adjusted weight, right? So it's like some weeks I'll come in and I'll be confident like, oh, I could pull 195, but if I'm not like if I'm not at the point where I know that I have it under complete control, like a belt, if you don't know, just helps you like put more of the weight on your core, right? And every exercise, especially compound exercises, are going to be hyper connected to your core. And so a lot of times, most people like, there's a joke that most people get into the gym and they don't even end up training core anyways. And it's because as much as training it extra is beneficial, compound lifts target your core in a way that that isolating them is kind of not super necessary. Like obviously, I'm not saying skip ab exercises, but if you are frequently compound lifting, there's so much of the weight and pressure is already put on your core anyways. But the biggest reason to work core um, is so that you can have a more structured um, the biggest reason to work core is that it's going to translate into your compound lifts, and you're going to be able to move a lot more weight because the whole idea of a compound lift is that it's not just focusing that one muscle. So like a squat, for example, it's not all about your quads. If your back and your core isn't strong enough, you're not going to be able to move weight at all because it's all stemming from the center of your body. And it's like I was saying with like your joints as well. Like they're kind of overlooked, but that's the reason why people rely so heavily on a belt sometimes is because of an underdeveloped core, right? And ideally, like with the same thing with lifting straps, is like ideally you'll be able to work up to hitting the weight without lifting straps. But it's a good way to kind of like break into new barriers because you're not going to be able to like exert your muscle or exert the amount of force to the same level that you could without the gear, right? And then slowly removing that for me is how I found the best way to like cement those gains, right? Because if I'm like using my belt every week, then it's gonna get to the point where I'm like super reliant on the belt, and my core is not going to be engaged to the point that it needs to be. So with the grading system, like if I can ace something, particularly like for both sets, then next week I'm coming in, I'm like, I don't need a belt or I don't need straps, right? And so I just kind of like adjust based on the need for that day. 195 is kind of at the upper edge of what I feel like I pull. So I feel that they're both needed today, right? All right, so third set, Dapper here. And again, it's the first working set, so this should be like full exertion. And ideally, I'll get 7 reps to full contraction, nice, clean, and controlled. That's definitely at the higher edge of what I can handle. So I wrote it down last week that my plan was to drop set after 195. Um, so I think I'm going to take 10 pounds off, take the belt and the straps off, and just really drill form for the last set. Uh, every week's kind of different on how I adjust my working weight because basically that third set is going to be like a benchmark. Like with incline yesterday, it was super easy to hit 185 7 times. So I just did it again. But those I would call like a B plus. They weren't quite where I wanted them. They weren't bad. So at that point, I think it's more beneficial to just like drill the form even harder. Okay, 185 for the fourth working set. I'm using no gear this time, so it's just gonna help me like be able to focus hyper extensively on my form and just make sure that they're as clean as possible. I don't like to progress myself into a higher weight unless I feel like I'm confident in being able to control it. So it's always better to me to like drop the weight a little bit and work my form. I'm still working through that uh, right elbow injury, so it's definitely noticeable in all of my compounds. Ironically, when I get into my accessories and stuff, I'm just pounding out bicep curls. I don't really feel it. I don't know if it's because at a certain point I'm so pumped up that it's just like brain shuts off. But definitely in the compounds, I'm feeling it. And I know that once I can get that healed up, I'll probably see substantial progress. But it's really like going into the fifth, sixth, seventh rep, it's super noticeable. And just goes back to what I said about like joint care is almost more important than actually progressively overloading every week. Because otherwise, just adding more weight is just going to make the injury even worse. So this is, in my opinion, one of the more underrated bicep exercises because people don't do it properly, right? So preacher curls are, I think, really good for the same reason that flies are really good, is that they extend the muscle to a certain point where you're gonna get better results. But at the same time, you're not going to be able to do as much weight with it. So it's definitely an exercise that like you leave your ego at the door, and it's a hypertrophy focus. Because if you overload it, you can still get like half the rep, but it's not going to be the same. Uh, it's not going to be the same result ultimately. I think even if you have to go just like 10 pounds in single arm, you're going to get a better extension on the bicep. Yeah, definitely think those are effective. Just about doing them properly. This set, I'm gonna double arm them, but there's a difference here. When you're single arming them, you're getting more focused on the bicep because your arm turns out just slightly, right? But when you're double arming, they're curled in. And so the big difference with that, like if you're curling a flat bar, your thumbs are going to be pointed out a little more. And that's going to be a better bicep focus. But when you use a curl bar, that that rotation inward just slightly shifts the focus to the brachialis. And it's the same with hammer curls. When you're hammer curling, you're not just hitting the main long head of the bicep, you're actually hitting the brachialis out here. So it's important to know which one you're trying to focus because mind muscle connection, right? And if you think that you're working the long head of your bicep and you're actually in reality working the outside of your arm, you're not going to be able to get the same squeeze and contraction, which with hypertrophy is the goal. It's about the squeeze and contraction, right? So always understanding what the goal of your exercise is going to be the probably most important thing to actually targeting, like a specific goal. Another thing that I think is vitally important to understand on pull day is that, I mean, really it applies to any exercise, but pull day specifically is that the negatives could be just as beneficial to muscle growth as the positives of the rep, right? And so what I mean by that is with the curl, for example, this is going to be the positive, the contraction itself, but the negative is going to be the coming down. And if you can control that coming down to get a better burn, you're going to exhaust the muscle to a point that you couldn't from just focusing on just squeezing. Like a lot of people get in the trap of like with preacher curls, they'll just kind of like 3/4 rep it over and over and over. But when you do a full extension, you're going to be able to get a lot more tension, time under tension on that muscle, right? Time under tension is the key word there because the more time under tension that you're exerting, the more that you're exhausting the muscle and therefore the more muscle growth. It's just anything that results in more strenuous focus on the muscle is just going to lead to better muscle growth. Totally unrelated, but I lost my wrist straps like I don't even know, like a month ago, and they're just like sitting right here. It's like finding a $20 bill in your pocket. All right, so on the same note, given that curl bar is going to focus more the brachialis, the best way I like to do bicep focus curls is with the flat bar on the squat rack. They're definitely going to be a little more challenging than like a regular dumbbell curl, but with the added reward of the fact that it is more challenging than a regular dumbbell curl. So like most of the things that I do in my program, I'll hit it with a heavy set and then I'll drop it. And I think that helps you kind of like work on force output and then at the same time target muscle growth. And like I said in the last video, that's the two tenets of the way I train, is that maximizing force output and maximizing muscle growth. So for me, I feel that drop sets are probably the easiest way to do both those things and also make sure that you're actually achieving like maximum output from what you're putting in. So when I hit a drop set, I just try to really amp up the tempo to another degree, right? Because the first set with the heavy set is more about like being able to just control it. Same with the Dapri, right? It's just about being able to control a heavy amount of weight. But once I switch into pumping, it's just pumping it out, right? Trying not to like use too much momentum, but around this point, it's like I have to use a little bit at least. And then around here, I'll just kind of like, I'm not going to get many more, so I'll just kind of see if I can cheat a few more. Yeah, I definitely think that there is a time and place for momentum. Like, as you fatigue the muscle, I think that using momentum is going to be the best way to like break into new ground, right? But when you're just trying to like, when you're trying to engage the muscle at the beginning, I think it's better to just practice using no momentum, right? And just kind of working it in as you inch closer to failure, right? I was a little pissed about losing my wrist straps, but I think it was probably one of the better things that happened because it just kind of like pointed out how much I was relying on them. And I guess that kind of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the video, is that like wrist straps and the belt, they can definitely be useful, but if you get over relying on them, it's just like a crutch, you know? And that's not to say that like I don't believe in using wrist straps for like pretty much everything. It's just to say that you can't get completely reliant on them because A, if you don't have them one day, that's going to negatively impact you. And B, it's just like there is a certain level of grip strength that even if you like separately train your grip strength with forearms or like a grip strength trainer, it's just like it's not going to directly translate necessarily to being able to hold the barbell, right? And so from like a powerlifting point of view, you don't want to get too reliant on using that because it's like you do have to build up. It is a skill being able to hold a weight that's like at the edge of your limit, you know. But I don't have the strongest wrists right now. I can hear them clicking and clacking, so I definitely am glad I found these. Well, I'm working on healing them up. Yeah, preacher curls and dumbbell bicep curl are both severely underrated. They're not something that I've been like doing extensively, but they're both two workouts that I'm starting to realize are slept on. So I really prefer assisted pull-ups, but we don't have anything like that. But when it comes to lat pull downs, I think they're like the most important back workout that there is, right? And there's definitely a right way to do them and a wrong way to do them. And without like digging into that way too much, it's basically just about like using the correct amount of momentum. If you're not using the correct amount of momentum, it's just like you're taking all the contraction out of the rep. And also, it's like you've got to think of like squeezing your shoulders behind your back. It's less so of like a pull, which I guess is kind of one of the weird things I've learned after years of lifting. It's like it's the same with like push exercises. Is you're trying to like engage your chest and your elbow at the same time, and it's not just necessarily about throwing the weight out. It's about like creating this like simultaneous movement, right? So it's the same thing with the lat pull down. It's about like driving that elbow back and squeezing the lat at the same time, right? So like the major points on a lat pull down though, it's like you don't want to overextend. Like if you're coming all the way out to the top and you can like feel your arm kind of like what's the word I'm looking for here? Like you can feel it kind of pop out of the socket, right? That's not what you're looking for. Like it should be like within a consistent controlled range, right? And you don't want to lean back too far, but you don't want to be all the way forward either, right? And the best way I ever heard anyone describe this is that when you're driving down your elbow, you almost want to imagine that there's like a pencil in the middle of your back and you're trying to snap it with your elbows, right? So just think of like driving into the center of your back as opposed to like pulling down the weight, right? Pretty solid back pump. Not the best workout, but feeling a little chunky. But I've put on a lot of muscle since I was like sub 10% body fat. Just kind of trying to get used to size, I guess. Definitely got a decent amount of work to do here. Um, Definitely got a decent amount of work to do. Like I was saying in my last video, I'm trying not to neglect my macros. for the sake of body fat loss. So I'm feeling a little chunkier than I'd like to right now, but I don't want to lose all the muscle that I just put on. So just kind of chipping away at it slow and steady. And make sure to follow, like, subscribe, comment for more. I'll be making more videos and stuff, so this is only the beginning. And hope you guys join me in my journey.